This is so cool. I think I've listened to the album about 6 times now. It's so good.
Oh, yeah.
Were you a Critical Role fan or Critter before you started collaborating with them?
I didn't watch their show, but I knew of them, and they were. I can't remember if they're the Vox Machina, or whatever you say that. I can't remember if that already came out or not, but I remember seeing a lot of buzz around that too, and it started to like pick up by the time they reached out to us, and it was actually kind of like, oh wow, that's cool, because I've been hearing a lot about the stuff they've been doing. So, and a bunch of the people here on the team are D&D nerds, and they were all into the Critical Role thing too. So
very cool. And then what was the process like composing for this? Because it's so interesting that there is like original music on it, because it is a live stream D&D game.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little similar to kind of how we approach video game music, but it's even more removed, because it's like film is probably the most like locked, because it's like you have all these sync points you need to hit, and you're locked to these certain ideas and emotion. Games is a little farther removed, but in this, it's like there's not even visuals. There's nothing. There's not even a story yet. It's like they're going to tell the story over it. So it's basically writing moods, that like we know we'll encounter. So it's like we're going to need some more peaceful things and some more hopeful things, and sad and battle and really gnarly battle and like creepy tracks and mysterious things. So it's like writing all these different moods. And then while we're writing, just kind of like making up the story in your head, basically to do it. And then Matt, the DM, he kind of arranges all the music, and then we'll trigger it based on the moods he thinks he needs to convey while he's telling the story. So,
wow. So the music comes first.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So the music comes first, not so much that they like, oh, this is going to be our plot, and we're going to do that. It's more like we come up with the music and the moods. And then while he's coming up with his own, fantasy stories for the characters and everything, it's like he's applying the moods we created to that story. So it's kind of neat, because it's just all like fantasy. It's all imagination. So that's why it's pretty fun, pretty limitless.
Yeah. Wow. I think I assumed that, I don't know, like the story came first, but that totally makes sense, because they would have to use it while playing.
Uh-huh.
Did you collaborate with any of the players or anyone like that from Critical Role?
Yeah. So like Matt, the DM, was given some creative feedback. A bunch of the people on the team were given feedback. Matt actually, on one of the tracks, he did like a laugh on I can't remember who, someone on our team wrote that track or whatever, but they wanted like a spooky atmosphere and everything, and he was just like, oh yeah, I want to dub some stuff. And we're like, okay, and he recorded his own voice, sent it back to us, and we mixed it in. So I actually saw on some of the thing on like YouTube or something, one of the comments, someone was like, is that your laugh in there? And it was like, so people got good ears.
Wow, that's so cool. And then so there's a soundtrack for Legend of Vox Machina. Did that have any sort of influence on the Welcome to Tal'Dorei soundtrack?
No, not as far as like referencing themes or anything, but it's kind of like keeping the whole sound of what they were using. And they were using a lot of like stock music, and then they had their custom music that they had some people writing, and just kind of getting in that world. They sent us a lot of reference before we started of just like, this is kind of what our world is going to sound like, and then we just kind of went from there, just continued writing more in that fantasy realm. So
was there anything specific from kind of that Critical Role or Exandria world that inspired any of the tracks?
Yeah, as far as like zones, and that's kind of back to the writing of like emotions and everything. That's kind of where we were starting on. It's just like, as we're exploring these different zones, these different caves, or these different boss arenas or whatever, it's like we have these ideas of how it's going to sound, and they were also pretty limitless of like what we could do with the tracks too. They gave us pretty few feedback on things, but a lot of just like pushing us on like, oh yeah, like you can, do whatever you want here, have like a big climax here or do things. And then they can kind of edit things, because I think that's kind of what they kind of wanted to go for too, is just kind of like letting our imagination go wild and kind of write whatever we wanted to write. And then they would almost like like feed that into the story, and use that almost as like inspiration for their own plot, which I think is great.
Yeah. So how did because you said you guys kind of had to come up with a story in your head for each track that was there before the Critical Role story, of course. How does that storytelling within music what is that process?
Sure. I mean, it draws, I mean, it's obviously like based in just our own past, and like most people here are nerds. So they're like, so we all grew up watching like fantasy film and reading fantasy books, playing games, all this stuff. So we have kind of this backdrop of what a fantasy world like, should sound like, but then it's like we get to put our own spin on it, and just kind of like think through a story. And like when they're writing a battle track and they have some reference music of just kind of like, this is the vibe, whatever, it's just kind of putting your imagination and imagining like what's going to happen, how many people are here, is how like hot and intense is this battle, is it like a really dark serious thing, or is it more light and like fun almost, so trying to cover all these different ideas, it's just kind of whatever we come up with, it's just that's how they're going to use it.
Oh, that's so cool. And then all three of the tracks that you wrote, the Thousand Steps, the Nymph's Heart, and the Champion's Goodbye, sound so vastly different. Can you walk me through creating those three different like compositions?
Yeah, sure. So they changed the names on some of the when we worked. So yeah, Thousand Steps. I think that's that's kind of like the slightly spooky one, right?
Yeah.
With the choir. Yeah. So that one was really fun. I was just kind of like experimenting with these like the chord thing in the beginning, where it's like doing the augmented chord and following down, and I just came up with this like progression that just keeps happening, and then with like the women's choir on top, just kind of creating this sort of like mystical, slightly off-putting atmosphere, of just like, like in my mind as I was writing that, it's like I'm imagining, there's total like magic, and just like, but slightly perverse magic, just like, yeah, that's kind of creating that. What was the name of the other tracks? It was Thousand Steps.
The Nymph's Heart and the Champion's Goodbye.
Yeah, Nymph's Heart. That was the one that started with the harp thing. It was just like the simple harp pluck, and just having like, because we made a set of different tracks that like fit the emotion we called peaceful, basically. Oh. And we made, can't remember how, like 4 or something in that peaceful idea, and we had all the different composers here write something in peaceful, but it was everybody's own take on what peaceful could mean, and it's like, it was funny they called it Nymph's Heart, because that was a similar thing I was thinking of like peaceful, but kind of like the forest, dark, peaceful type feeling, where it's not like super bright and like hills, I was thinking kind of dark, secluded, peaceful. So that was kind of, I like that they called it Nymph's Heart, because it kind of played into what I was thinking of in my mind when I was writing it.
Very cool.
Then yeah, Champion's Goodbye too. That was just, they just wanted to go for a sad track, and they're just like, think like, like your friend has fallen and stuff. There has to be like a little bit of hope, but like tragedy. And that was just like, yeah. So I just wrote like, really, I was just thinking of that, like really tragic, and then bringing in the choir, and like, that's my favorite kind of music, is just writing just sad, really sad music.
I love it. Yeah. Like the spookiness came in on that first one. I was like, oh, wow. Okay, cool. I like it. I dig it. Were there any unique instruments or musical techniques that you got to play with when creating this music?
Yeah, so instruments, we were sticking mostly to like the Western orchestra type thing, but we did like some slight like, world instruments, some like winds and some dulcimers and some things like that. But the bass was the orchestra. But as far as techniques, yeah, like just going with the slightly extended techniques for some of these like creepy and mysterious tracks was a lot of fun. We had some like aleatoric textures, which is just like, instruments not playing in time basically, but just like creating sounds, just create like almost like a texture of music. And then also just some extended techniques of like some ugly, like, strings rising and some things like that, just to make it off-putting. Like in the Thousand Steps track too, just exploring harmony a lot, trying to come up with just weird ways we can just, keep it off-putting and just like, just modulating these augmented chords and slow stepwise motion and stuff. It's like, yeah.
Very cool. And then you obviously, you want to keep that fantasy feel, but how do you still make it unique?
Mm-hmm. Mostly from that kind of stuff. Like I really like to approach music harmonically and think like just trying to create cool chords and cool textures is like the big thing. And there's such like a strong bass and like almost like 95% of the music we do here is like fantasy orchestral music. So it's like we have a pretty strong base in like fantasy in what that should sound like. So being able to explore just more of that is fun because we can just like tweak harmonies a little bit more, explore some textures we don't normally get to do. And also being able to start with like emotions is fun because it's like we don't really have this idea of like this is what it needs to sound like, but it's like we just need to convey this emotion and whatever that means to you. So it's like if we're writing a mysterious track, it's like what does mysterious mean to you personally, and how are you going to make that sound? So I think it becomes pretty personal to each composer. So it's kind of hard for it to not sound unique.
Nice. And then are there any of your kind of past work that really helped like with this specific Critical Role stuff?
Yeah. So like a lot of the games I've worked on for a long time, Honor of Kings is a big one, Kingdom Craft, just a lot of these like fantasy orchestral things. I do a lot of like stuff in the Chinese market that normally has a little bit of like the Chinese flavor to it. And so, I mean, I was working on today, I have like Chinese instruments on my floor right now, but just working with that like fantasy orchestral style is really fun. And just like, we do a lot of that here. So that definitely helps prepare us for this, but it's kind of like one of those like dream projects, at least when they come in and they're like, oh, hey, this is what we're doing. We're making like a total fantasy world. And like, it's, we're going to tell this story from scratch, and it's going to, we're just influences from like, Warcraft series and from all these different games, and it's just like, just having like, that's like the ultimate open door of like nerd, have fun type thing. So yeah, I feel like prepared for a long time for writing this kind of music. I love it.
Nice. And is there anything that you'd like to do kind of in that Critical Role world you haven't done yet, like potentially writing themes for each character?
Oh, stuff I would like to do. One of the things that I really love to do that I would love to do is like almost like tavern style music and stuff. Yeah. Just really, really simple folk tunes, the inspiration from like Ireland and that kind of thing. Just like small little guitars and some little percussion, just playing these little jigs and fun melodies and stuff. Like I love writing that kind of music. So that would be really cool to do in the future.
And that'd be perfect for it too.
Yeah, for sure. So that would be a ton of fun.
I love it. And what was kind of the most surprising part of this process?
The most surprising, but I guess the most surprising was the freedom of it, because like, because it's also like simultaneously makes it easier and harder when you have that much freedom. But normally when we work on a game, we get a whole design document about like the plot of the game. We have like reference for every single track of like, this is kind of what we were thinking. We'll have some art, and we'll just kind of go back and forth with the team and try to figure out what's going on. So it's like, there's a really clear idea of what it's supposed to sound like. But in this, it was like, again, emotions. And then they wrote up about like what this could mean, but it's like, but it's up to your own personal interpretation. So it's like, we wrote like I was saying, like 4 peaceful tracks or whatever, but everybody's peaceful track sounded totally different. It's like, cause what, peace sounds like can be have so many different moods. So.
Did you guys look at kind of like past episodes of Critical Role for
Yeah, for sure. They sent us a batch of some of the past music they were using. We watched their show a bunch, and especially to see how they're using it. Because one of the things Matt, the DM, does that's really cool is he'll make edits of a bunch of the tracks, and then he has like a soundboard, and like I'm sure you totally into this, but he plays back the sounds, like, and it plays back sections of the music based on what he's telling in the story, just so it can sync up perfectly. And that's really cool. So they were encouraging us just to have like sections of the music that they could edit to, and just like, so that was really helpful, definitely watching and seeing how they're going to use the music on how to write it.
Yeah, because I'm catching up a little bit on it because I was behind recently, and I think I noticed the music more so with it, and it's so interesting how it fits because it's such a balancing act of it because it elevates the story and that immersiveness, but it can't overpower it like will happen with a lot of shows and movies where the music kind of becomes the main star.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's actually a point we consciously made too when we were watching the show too. You're seeing that they're constantly talking over the track. It's like most of the tracks too aren't super bombastic. They're actually like kind of flat as far as like dynamics go. You know, we have some ebb and flow, but we kind of wanted these long textures, you know, that just kind of create mood more so than we do to like really jump out and hear things. But then there's some sections, you know, that they can play back, you know, if they want to hit a certain moment and everything. So, but that was very conscious to try to create like background music was the idea.
Wow, that's be kind of like very cool, but it's like your world building just through the music specifically.
Yeah, and I think that's something that they are trying to do, and I think is really cool because in the past they did have some custom stuff and then they were using a lot of stock music too. But I do think it's really cool that they are now like branding their franchise with their own full creative everything. You know, they got their full art, and then they got their TV show, they got books, they got you know, now that they've got their own label and their own album coming out. Like I think that's awesome that they're now sonically like branding what they're, you know, I keep calling it like a game. Like, what do you even call Critical? Like, you know, it's like to brand Critical Role's like sonic sound, I think is very cool.
Yeah, I loved it. It wasn't just like, oh, we have an album. It's, oh, we have an album and a record label. And you're like, do you guys rest? What?
They're just everything. So it's like they're franchise, I guess you could say. So.
Yep. It's so much fun. Would you want to write music kind of that is more kind of in that style you would for a video game or movie where it syncs up specifically with like the show with pre-recorded stuff? Or do you prefer this kind of here's a vibe and go with it?
I like doing both, like a mix of both, because sometimes when it's like I do way too much linear stuff, which I don't, honestly, because we do video games here. So the only times I'm doing linear is if we're doing trailers or in-game cutscenes or cool promotional stuff. And that's cool because we get it every once in a while. But if I was doing it every single day and just video and like and movie and that kind of soundtrack, like I could get bored of the structure of everything too, and not having the full freedom to develop ideas as I see fit, you know. And that's why game music's a little more free, and then this is probably even more free than that because it's completely, you know, its own thing before there's even making the music before there's a use for it, you know. So that's the ultimate freedom. So that's really fun. I like doing a mix.
Very cool. And is there kind of a universe that you would like to tap into, like Marvel, DC, Star Wars, or even like Lord of the Rings or something that you haven't had the chance to?
Oh, they're all super cool. Like, I've always loved like the Warcraft universe. I always thought that was so cool. You said Lord of the Rings. I've always thought that was such a beautiful, great universe. Star Wars is definitely fun. We've done a little bit of Star Wars stuff in the past here. Yeah, I don't know. There's so many cool franchises. Yeah, those are big ones like Lord of the Rings and Warcraft. Those are very cool.
Nice. And then so music becomes just so iconic in franchises. Like you have Star Wars with the Imperial March, you have that Avengers and Spider-Man theme in Marvel, and then like Jurassic Park's theme. Is there a specific kind of track on this soundtrack that for you sticks out and you're like, oh, when I hear that, I think of this like Critical Role franchise?
Yeah, so like the Welcome to Tal'Dorei track, which is like the main title track and stuff. None of our composers here wrote it. It was what is his name? He wrote a bunch of music for them in the past, but yeah, he wrote that theme, and that's kind of like their entrance of like this is the theme to Tal'Dorei and everything. So
yeah. And then I know like you said fantasy is your favorite genre to kind of play in. Is there another one that you maybe haven't had the chance to as much, but you really would like to?
Like a genre to write in?
Yeah.
It's fun to dip into like sci-fi and stuff every once in a while, especially when it's like orchestral sci-fi. Like I did a Star Trek experience thing, a VR thing a while ago, and that was actually really fun because it was like it was same thing like orchestral music, but it's just such a different vibe of just really cold and like science fiction stuff. That's really fun. I love doing horror games. Horror games are so fun. So that's really cool. Just trying to create weird otherworldly textures. Yeah, those are probably the big ones, like sci-fi and horror.
Nice. And then I know that this was a lot of kind of conceptualizing these like world or emotion driven themes. How do you do that for more story beat or character motivated themes?
You're saying writing for like character?
Yeah.
So yeah, we do a lot of that, especially for the game we do, Honor of Kings, where it's like it's a MOBA game from China, and like they're constantly releasing new content, and they'll do like new characters, or they'll have like a new skin for the character, and we're like writing music themes for the promotional materials, login screens and stuff like that. And that's like super fun to do. I love doing those, because then you can like take a character, they'll usually provide some art and a backstory of the character, and like you can start to get a feel of what it's supposed to sound like. I'll usually get some melodies going on the piano and sketch out like an idea, and then just orchestrate to the piano sketch, once the melodies and everything are put down. Very cool. When you were watching some of those past episodes of Critical Role, was there a character that stood out where you were like, I would love to write something for them? Not particularly, but mostly because it was like thinking more of like the moods and the ambience of where they are, if like what they're describing and like where they're going, like that kind of thing, of just like that shock value of like, I'm now in this zone, like that's kind of the idea of what I kept focusing on. Very cool. Yeah, it'd be so cool to really like dig into the horror stuff too, because there's definitely some episodes of the show where it goes full on horror. Yeah. Some of the tracks we did here too were like fairly spooky. So, was there like kind of with that collaboration process of working with them, but before the story is even told, how would you kind of in your mind be like, okay, I would love it. Like, obviously you're not in control of the story, but was there anything where you're like, I hope that this gets used in like this sort of situation? I mean, similarly to that track, The Nymph's Heart, it was like, I didn't know that they were going to, use it in that setting, like the Nymph's Heart and stuff, and thinking this like foresty, wooded pastures and stuff, but that's absolutely what I was imagining it for too. So that's, I think, very cool. And like, yeah, The Champion's Goodbye too. Like that was another track that I was just really hoping was going to be used in like some really dramatic death, departing scene and everything. So yeah. Very cool. And are you guys working with them on any other projects? Yeah, so nothing right now that we're talking about. This album like just came out, so that's big news. Like hopefully we'll be working with them in the future, because it was actually like super amazing being able to work on it. So yeah, it's so good. I love it so much, and it's just, you did such a great job on it. Oh, thank you. Yeah, all the composers here are like really awesome to work with, and we're constantly going back to see what everybody else is doing too. And because we have this freedom too, it is kind of fun. We're like, I'll pop in to like see what Steven's doing on his like peaceful track, and it's like totally different from mine. And he's like, oh yeah, I was kind of imagining of doing this kind of thing. We're gonna have the choir come in here or whatever. And I'm like, wow, that's super rad. Like, so it's kind of just like a play thing where everyone's writing their own music, and you run in and just kind of be like, wow, that's so cool. That's cool what you're doing. And we're all checking in on each other. Very cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I hope that we get to hear even more of your guys' stuff in Critical Role, because it's so incredible. Oh, well, absolutely. Yeah. And thanks for taking the time of asking me the questions, because yeah, it's fun to talk about, because I liked working on this a lot. So.